Oops, I forgot to send you an invite. My brother chuckled, adjusting the cuffs of his custom tuxedo. Behind him, my father coldly pointed toward the heavy oak exit doors, telling me to turn around and leave before I embarrassed the family. I did not scream. I did not cry. I simply smiled and said, "Do not worry. You are not the only one who knows how to forget." Before the first bottle of expensive champagne was even popped, my brother's face turned ghost white. Moments later, he came running after me, begging me to come back. My name is Naomi, 32 years old, and as a self-made venture capitalist, I learned early on that blood might be thicker than water, but toxic blood will infect your entire life if you do not cut it off. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to remind an entitled family member exactly who holds the power. The air outside the Obsidian estate was crisp and tasted like expensive perfume and roasted catering. This was not just any wedding venue. This was the crown jewel of the city, a sprawling modern architectural marvel of glass and black marble nestled on 40 acres of private woodland. It was the kind of place that commanded a 2-year waiting list and a 6-figure minimum spend. It was also the exact venue my older brother Darius had chosen to prove to his bride's family that he was a titan of industry. Just 48 hours earlier, I had received a panicked, sweating phone call from Darius. His venue deposit had bounced. The estate management was threatening to cancel the entire weekend, locking him out of the property just days before the rehearsal dinner. He cried on the phone, begging me to save him from absolute humiliation. As a venture capitalist who manages multi-million-dollar portfolios, I had the liquidity. Despite a lifetime of him taking all the credit and me taking all the blame in our family, I quietly wired $50,000 to the estate to save my brother's big day. I did it without demanding praise, without telling our parents, and without expecting a grand parade. I simply wanted my brother to get married without a catastrophic public failure. I arrived at the estate wearing a sharply tailored midnight blue Tom Ford business suit. It was sleek, professional, and entirely me. I handed my keys to the valet and walked up the sweeping limestone steps toward the grand foyer. Through the massive glass doors, I could see the celebration beginning to unfold. Waiters in pristine white jackets circulated with trays of hors d'oeuvres. A live string quartet was playing a beautiful classical rendition of an R&B song. Everything looked flawless. As I reached for the brass handle of the front door, the heavy glass swung open outward. Darius stepped out onto the landing, quickly pulling the door shut behind him to block my view of the lobby. He looked immaculate in an ivory tuxedo jacket, a fresh haircut, and a smug expression that instantly made my stomach turn. "Naomi," he said, his tone lacking any trace of the desperate, begging man who had called me 2 nights ago. "What are you doing here?" I paused, smoothing the lapel of my suit. "What do you mean, what am I doing here? It is your wedding day. I came to celebrate." Darius let out a short, breathy chuckle and crossed his arms over his chest. He looked me up and down, his eyes lingering on my suit with obvious distaste. "Oops, I forgot to send you an invite." I stared at him, waiting for the punchline. There was no punchline. His eyes were cold, calculating, and completely serious. "You forgot to invite me," I repeated, my voice deadly calm. "I wired $50,000 to save this exact venue 48 hours ago, and you forgot to invite me." "Keep your voice down," Darius hissed, glancing nervously over his shoulder through the glass doors. "Look, I appreciate the loan. I really do. But you have to understand the optics here. This is not just a family barbecue. This is a highly curated event." "Optics," I said the word slowly, letting it roll off my tongue. "Yes, optics," Darius snapped, stepping closer to physically intimidate me. "Vanessa's family is inside. Do you have any idea who they are? Her father is a federal judge. Her mother sits on the board of 3 different hospital systems. Her entire bridal party is made up of Alpha Kappa Alpha sorority sisters. They are Jack and Jill alumni. They are legacy. They represent true Black excellence." He gestured aggressively toward my outfit. "And then there is you. You show up to my luxury wedding looking like you are about to audit a tech company. You do not fit the aesthetic, Naomi. You are too rigid. You are too masculine. You do not blend in with high society." Vanessa explicitly asked that we keep the guest list to people who understand the vibe of this caliber of event. I could feel a familiar icy rage building in my chest, but I kept my face completely blank. This was the dynamic we had lived with our entire lives. Darius was the golden child, the handsome, charismatic son, who was allowed to fail upward endlessly supported by our parents' delusions. I was the workhorse. The sister who was expected to provide the financial safety net while remaining completely invisible, so I would not cast a shadow on his fragile ego. So let me get this straight, I said, making sure to articulate every single word clearly. You took my $50,000 to pay for the roof over your head today, but my presence is too embarrassing for your new in-laws. Darius rolled his eyes, letting out an exasperated sigh, as if I were a toddler failing to understand basic math. Naomi, you make 7 figures a year. 50 grand is literally pocket change for you. Do not act like you remortgaged a house for me. It was a simple business transaction to keep things running smoothly. I will pay you back eventually when my new startup gets funded. But today is about me and Vanessa. I cannot have you walking around the reception looking like a corporate buzzkill and making Vanessa's family uncomfortable with your whole aggressive boss lady routine. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a sleek silver money clip, and peeled off a crisp $100 bill. He actually held it out toward me. Here, Darius said, his voice dripping with condescension. Go grab a nice dinner downtown on me. Treat yourself to a steak. Just do not do it here. And please use the side path to walk back to the valet. I do not want Vanessa's mother looking out the window and seeing you loitering on the front steps. I looked at the $100 bill fluttering in the cool breeze. I looked at the brother who had spent his entire life taking my resources, stealing my peace, and demanding my silence. I looked past his shoulder through the heavy glass doors of the Obsidian estate. Inside the foyer, I could see the venue manager, a brilliant woman named Clara, whom I had personally hired 3 years ago. Clara caught my eye through the glass. She saw Darius blocking my path. She looked alarmed and took a step forward to intervene, but I caught her gaze and gave her a subtle, almost imperceptible shake of my head. I held up one finger. Wait. Clara stopped in her tracks, nodding respectfully, and stepped back into the shadows. Darius was completely oblivious. He thought he was the king of the castle standing on a throne he had scammed his way onto. He had absolutely no idea that the very ground he was standing on, the marble steps beneath his polished shoes, and the building hosting his spectacular lie, legally belonged to my limited liability company. I did not buy this venue to show off. I bought it as a silent investment, placing Clara as the public face to manage operations. Darius had chosen this place purely for the prestige, entirely unaware that the sister he was currently rejecting was the ultimate owner of the property. When he called me crying for the $50,000, he thought he was paying an anonymous corporate management company. He was actually just transferring my own money back into my own corporate account to clear the books. Take the money, Naomi, Darius urged, shaking the bill at me again. Do not make this difficult. I am stepping into a new echelon of society today. I need everything to be flawless. I did not take the money. Instead, I smoothed my jacket one more time, squared my shoulders, and looked my brother directly in his arrogant, deceitful eyes. I was not the little girl who used to cry when he excluded me from games. I was not the teenager who did his homework so our parents would not yell at him. I was a 32-year-old titan in my industry, and I was entirely done being his stepping stone. You are absolutely right, Darius, I said, my voice carrying a terrifying softness. This is your special day, and you are stepping into a completely new reality. I turned around, leaving him standing there with the money hovering in the air. I did not raise my voice, and I did not look back. I walked down the sweeping limestone stairs with measured, deliberate steps. The conflict was no longer a petty sibling rivalry. It had just escalated into total war. As my heel touched the first limestone step, the heavy glass doors behind me swung open with a sharp rush of air. The lively sounds of the string quartet spilled out onto the landing, quickly muffled by the harsh, commanding voice of my father. Naomi, stop right there. I turned around slowly. Standing on the grand threshold, flanking my brother, like two heavily armed guards, were my parents. Warren and Yvonne looked like they had stepped straight out of a luxury lifestyle magazine. My father wore a perfectly tailored midnight tuxedo, a stark contrast to the cheap off-the-rack suits he wore when I was a child. My mother was draped in a custom emerald silk gown, her hair styled into an immaculate updo diamonds glittering at her throat. They looked every bit the wealthy, sophisticated patriarch and matriarch of a thriving dynasty. It was a beautiful, meticulously crafted illusion. I stood on the step below them, looking up at the people who had brought me into this world. I waited for one of them to ask why Darius was standing there holding $100 bill. I waited for my father to demand an explanation for why his only daughter was being turned away from a family milestone. I waited for my mother to pull me into a hug and tell Darius to stop playing a cruel joke. Instead, my father crossed his arms, his jaw set in a tight, angry line. He did not look at Darius, he glared directly at me. I thought I told Darius to handle this quietly, my father said, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper, meant to avoid carrying into the lobby. Why are you out here causing a scene, Naomi? I looked at him, my expression unreadable. I am not causing a scene, Dad. I am leaving. I just found out I was never invited. My father scoffed, taking a step forward and pointing a stiff finger toward the valet driveway. You are doing exactly what you always do. You show up pushing your weight around trying to make everything about you. This is not the time or the place for your corporate power plays. Darius is marrying into a very important family today. Vanessa's father is a federal judge. Her uncles are chief surgeons at Johns Hopkins. They are esteemed members of this community. They expect a certain level of decorum, a certain pedigree. We cannot have you marching in here looking like you are ready to foreclose on the venue. The sheer audacity of his statement hung in the crisp evening air. My father, a man whose last business venture I had quietly salvaged from bankruptcy 3 years ago, was lecturing me about pedigree. He was standing on the steps of a multi-million-dollar estate that I literally owned, telling me that my presence would offend a family of doctors and judges. Dad, I said, keeping my tone perfectly measured. Darius took $50,000 from me 2 days ago to save this wedding, and he did not invite me. You do not see a problem with that. Before my father could answer, my mother stepped forward. She placed a manicured hand on Darius's shoulder, smoothing his jacket with a protective maternal gesture. Her eyes narrowed as she looked down at me. Do not bring money into this, Naomi. My mother snapped, her voice dripping with venom. You always do this. You weaponize your bank account to bully your brother. You know Darius has been under immense pressure to make this day perfect for Vanessa. You have more money than you know what to do with. Helping your brother should be an act of family loyalty, not a transaction you hold over his head to force your way into spaces where you do not belong. I stared at her. Spaces where I do not belong. The words echoed in my mind. Look at yourself, my mother continued, gesturing dismissively at my Tom Ford suit. You wore a business suit to a high society wedding. You could not even bother to put on a proper gown. You have always possessed this harsh masculine energy. It is embarrassing. Vanessa is a beautiful, elegant woman. Her family embodies grace and tradition. They are legacy members of Jack and Jill. Her bridal party is filled with her Alpha Kappa Alpha sisters. They represent the pinnacle of Black refinement. And you show up here projecting this aggressive, independent boss persona. It throws off the entire aesthetic of the event. We agreed with Darius. It was better for everyone if you just stayed home and celebrated from afar. I felt the air leave my lungs, not from sadness, but from the sheer, breathtaking cruelty of her admission. We agreed with Darius. They knew. My own parents had sat around a dinner table, discussed my exclusion, and collectively decided that I was too much of an embarrassment to be seen in public with my new in-laws. They had enthusiastically endorsed taking my money while locking me out of the celebration. You agreed with him. I repeated, my voice dropping to a whisper. You sat there and decided I was not good enough to attend my own brother's wedding, but my money was good enough to pay for it. My father uncrossed his arms and sighed heavily, looking at me as if I were a stubborn employee refusing to follow a basic directive. Naomi, grow up. You chose your path. You chose to dedicate your life to venture capital and stock portfolios and corporate acquisitions. You sacrificed your softness. You sacrificed your family orientation for ambition. Darius is building a legacy today. Hai is securing our family's future in the upper echelons of society. He needs this win. He needs this network. We are protecting his future. If you truly loved him, you would understand that your presence here today is a liability. Now please, walk back to your car, drive home, and we will call you next week when things settle down. I did not argue. I did not scream. I did not ask them how they could be so blind to the fact that Darius's entire life was a house of cards. I simply watched them. I watched my mother clutching her expensive emerald gown, bought with the credit card I paid off for her last Christmas. I watched my father adjusting his designer watch, a retirement gift I had sourced for him from Switzerland. They had convinced themselves that my wealth was simply a communal family resource, a magical fountain they could drink from while simultaneously despising the woman who dug the well. As if summoned by the tension, the heavy glass doors opened one more time. Vanessa the bride stepped out onto the landing. She looked breathtaking in a custom Vera Wang gown, the train pooling like liquid silk around her feet. Her hair was styled to perfection, and her diamond engagement ring caught the evening light. But her face ruined the picture. Her expression was twisted into a sneer of pure, unfiltered disdain. She stood at the top of the grand staircase inside the foyer, looking through the open doors down at me on the front steps. Two of her bridesmaids, both dressed in elegant salmon pink gowns with subtle green accents, stepped up beside her. Vanessa leaned over and whispered something behind her hand. The bridesmaids looked at me, covered their mouths, and let out a synchronized mocking laugh. "Is there a problem out here, Warren?" Vanessa called out, her voice carrying a sweet, condescending lilt. "My father is looking for Darius. We need to start the toast soon. We cannot have the groomsmen dealing with loiterers." Loiterers. She called her future sister-in-law a loiterer. My mother immediately turned around, her face breaking into a wide, apologetic smile. "No problem at all, Vanessa, sweetheart. We are just handling a small delivery issue. Darius will be right inside. Go back in and stay warm. We do not want to ruin your beautiful makeup." Vanessa gave me one last sweeping look of absolute disgust. She turned her back to me, flipping her train dramatically, and walked back toward the ballroom, her bridesmaids trailing behind her like loyal soldiers. Darius turned to me, his chest puffed out with arrogant victory. "You heard her, Naomi. The real guests are waiting. Take your money, take your masculine energy, and go home. Do not make Dad call security." My father coldly pointed toward the driveway one last time. "Leave, Naomi. I will not ask you again." The betrayal was absolute. It was final. It was a physical weight settling into the limestone beneath my feet. For 32 years, I had held on to the delusional hope that if I just worked harder, if I just provided more, if I just solved enough of their problems, they would eventually love me as much as they loved him. I had bought their affection, funded their mistakes, and silently absorbed their insults, believing that one day they would see my value. Looking at my father's stern face, my mother's resentful glare, and my brother's triumphant smirk, that hope finally died. And in its place, a brilliant, terrifying clarity bloomed. They did not want a daughter. They did not want a sister. They wanted an ATM. And today the ATM was officially closing its doors. I did not feel anger anymore. I felt entirely liberated. The invisible chains of family obligation shattered, leaving me completely free to do exactly what needed to be done. I looked at my father. I looked at my mother. I looked at Darius, who was still holding that ridiculous $100 bill. I smiled. It was not a sad smile. It was a bright, genuine, predatory smile. I nodded slowly, adjusting the cuffs of my Tom Ford suit. "You are right, Dad. I am always making things about me. And Darius, you are right too. I really do not fit the aesthetic of this event. I think it is best if I leave you all to celebrate your new legacy." I turned my back on them and continued walking down the stairs. I did not look back as the heavy glass doors slammed shut behind me, sealing them inside the beautiful, luxurious trap they had no idea I had built. As the heavy glass doors slammed shut behind me, sealing my family inside the beautiful, luxurious trap they had no idea I had built. I stopped at the base of the limestone steps. I heard the faint click of the door cracking open again. Darius had stepped back out onto the landing, completely unable to resist getting the final word. "And Naomi," he called out, his voice dripping with mock sympathy. "Do not forget to take your $50,000 tax write-off. I am sure your accountant will love that. Enjoy your quiet night at home. The cool night air whipped around my tailored suit. I did not shed a single tear. I did not raise my voice or show even a fraction of the rage burning in my chest. I slowly turned my head, looking at him over my shoulder. I looked at the man who had stolen my money, my peace, and my family, and I delivered a promise wrapped in velvet. "Do not worry, Darius," I said, my voice carrying clearly across the pristine courtyard. "You are not the only one who knows how to forget." He frowned, the smugness faltering for a fraction of a second, but his arrogance quickly smothered his confusion. He let out a dismissive scoff, shook his head, and retreated into the grand foyer. The heavy doors clicked shut for the final time, locking the tomb. I turned on my heel and walked toward the valet stand. Every step I took away from that building felt like shedding a massive, suffocating weight. For decades, I had carried the heavy burden of being the family shock absorber. I had financed their delusions. I had swallowed their insults to keep the peace. I had played the good, quiet, supportive sister while they elevated a fraud to the status of a king. That version of me died on those limestone steps. The woman walking toward the valet was entirely different. She was the architect of her own destiny, the ruthless orchestrator of her own justice. I handed my ticket to the young attendant, who rushed to retrieve my sleek black Mercedes Maybach. I tipped him a crisp $50 bill, slid into the driver's seat, and closed the door. The heavy insulation of the luxury vehicle completely muted the sounds of the outside world, the string quartet, the clinking glasses, the arrogant laughter of my family. It all vanished. The silence inside the cabin was absolute. It was the perfect environment to execute a flawless dismantling. I pressed the ignition button, the engine purring to life, but I did not put the car in drive. Instead, I synced my phone to the dashboard display and used the voice command, "Call Elijah." The line rang exactly twice before a crisp, deep voice answered. "Naomi," Elijah said. There was no casual greeting. Elijah did not waste time with pleasantries when I called on a Saturday evening. At 35 years old, Elijah was a razor-sharp financial attorney, a brilliant legal mind who had helped me navigate the treacherous waters of venture capital and massive corporate acquisitions. We had built my empire together, contract by contract, loophole by loophole. He was fiercely loyal, meticulously detailed, and he absolutely despised my brother. "Are you at the reception?" Elijah asked, the faint sound of keyboard clicking echoing in the background. "I assume the golden child is putting on quite the show for the judge and his elegant sorority wife." "I am sitting in the driveway," I replied, staring through my windshield at the towering facade of the Obsidian estate. Darius blocked me at the door. He told me I do not fit the aesthetic of his new high society family. Mom and Dad stood behind him and told me to go home so I would not embarrass them in front of the Jack and Jill alumni. The clicking on Elijah's end stopped immediately. A heavy, dangerous silence filled the car. When Elijah finally spoke, his voice was dangerously low, vibrating with professional fury. "They took your $50,000 emergency wire transfer 2 days ago, and they turned you away at the door." "Yes, and your parents endorsed this wholeheartedly." Mom said my masculine energy ruins the elegant vibe. Elijah let out a dark, deep, entirely humorless chuckle, then sighed heavily. "Well, I suppose that means the grace period is officially over. What are your orders, boss?" I leaned back against the leather headrest, my eyes tracking the warm light spilling from the ballroom windows on the second floor. Inside, 200 of the city's most elite, image-obsessed individuals were drinking premium champagne, completely unaware that the floor beneath them was about to give out. First, I said, my voice steady and cold, "I need you to pull the special event insurance license for the Obsidian estate. Revoke it immediately." "The umbrella policy registered under your holding company," Elijah asked, his fingers flying across the keyboard again. "Exactly," I confirmed. "When I purchased the Obsidian estate 3 years ago, I structured the ownership through a web of corporate entities to maintain my privacy. The property management company that Clara ran was a subsidiary, but the liability and special event insurance policies were tied directly to my primary limited liability company. According to state law and local fire codes, a venue of that size cannot legally host a gathering of more than 50 people without an active, verified special event insurance policy." If the policy is revoked or suspended, the local fire marshal is automatically notified immediately. The building must be evacuated and locked down immediately due to severe safety liabilities. I am logging into the commercial insurance portal right now, Elijah said. I am authorizing an immediate suspension of the policy covering the estate. Reason for suspension is internal audit and immediate restructuring. The system will flag the venue as non-compliant within 60 seconds. How long until the authorities are notified, I asked. The automated alert goes straight to the county fire marshal's dispatch. On a Saturday night for a commercial venue, hosting over 200 people, they will dispatch an emergency closure unit very fast. They will walk right through those front doors and shut the entire production down within 15 minutes to avoid massive municipal liability. Good, I said, a cold smile touching my lips. Let us see how elegant Vanessa's family finds a fire marshal evacuation. Now for the second item, I continued. I need you to freeze the corporate black card. Elijah paused. The shadow account. You are sure? I have never been more sure of anything in my life, I replied. 2 years ago, Darius's highly publicized tech startup went completely bankrupt. He had burned through millions in investor funding cash. He squandered his operational budget on luxury cars and expensive dinners and failed to deliver a single functional product. To save him from facing criminal negligence charges from his investors, my father had begged me to intervene. I quietly absorbed Darius's remaining debt into one of my corporate structures, effectively burying his failure to save the family name. As part of that arrangement, I had issued Darius a corporate expense card with a massive limit strictly to be used for authorized business restructuring expenses while he supposedly got back on his feet. Instead, Darius had been secretly siphoning stolen funds. He used it to maintain his wealthy facade. He had used it to buy Vanessa's engagement ring. He had used it to lease his luxury sports car. And I knew for an absolute fact that he had placed that exact card on file with the Obsidian Estates catering and emergency operations team to cover any overages for the wedding tonight. He has been using it as his personal piggy bank to impress his new in-laws, I told Elijah. He placed it on file with Clara to cover the open bar tab and the vendor gratuities. Freeze it completely now. Report it as fraudulent activity. Lock it down completely. Consider it done, Elijah said, the satisfaction evident in his tone. I am logging into the corporate banking portal, initiating an immediate freeze on the card ending in 4822. I am flagging the last 5 transactions as unauthorized. The bank's fraud department will lock the account instantly. Any attempt to swipe that card will trigger a hard decline and a merchant fraud alert. Perfect. Naomi, Elijah said softly, dropping the formal business tone for a moment. You know what happens next, right? The fire marshal arrives soon. Once the fire marshal shows up, the venue manager is legally obligated to demand immediate payment for the emergency cancellation fees and the vendor hazard pay. Darius is going to try to swipe that card to make the problem go away in front of his wealthy new family. I know, I said. He is going to stand in front of a federal judge and a room full of doctors, and he is going to hand over a card that will brand him a fraud in bright red letters. Your parents are going to lose their minds, Elijah warned. They are going to realize you pulled the plug. They will come after you. Let them come, I replied, staring at the grand facade of the building. They made their choice. They decided my money was a family right, but my presence was a family disgrace. They wanted Darius to build a legacy. I am just providing the foundation for the legacy he actually deserves. The insurance policy is officially suspended, Elijah announced. The cancellation receipt just hit my inbox. The municipal alert has been triggered. The fire marshal should be receiving the dispatch order right now. And the card frozen, Elijah confirmed. Locked, sealed, and flagged for financial fraud. Darius has absolutely zero access to your capital. The trap is officially set. He is standing on a landmine, and he does not even know the timer has started. Thank you, Elijah. Keep your phone close. I have a feeling we are going to get some very interesting phone calls soon. I will have the legal team on standby, Elijah promised. Enjoy the spectacular, beautiful show, Naomi. I disconnected the call and placed my phone in the cup holder. I took a deep breath of the quiet, cool air inside the cabin. Every second that ticked by felt like a reclaimed piece of my soul. I was finally taking my power back. I did not drive away. I sat in the darkness of my Maybach, the engine quietly humming, and looked up at the ballroom windows. The silhouettes of the guests were moving gracefully behind the glass, laughing, dancing, and celebrating a lie. The countdown had begun, and I was exactly where I needed to be to watch the entire delusion shatter into a million irreparable pieces. The scene in the dashboard monitor was beautiful. I opened the secure management application on my dashboard display. As the owner of the property, I had unrestricted access to the high-definition security cameras installed throughout the building. The screen flickered for a fraction of a second before dividing into a grid of crystal-clear feeds. I selected the grand ballroom, maximizing the video and enabling the audio feed. I leaned back into my leather seat, crossing my arms, completely ready to enjoy the broadcast. Inside the grand ballroom, the scene was a masterclass in manufactured perfection. The space was bathed in the warm golden glow of massive crystal chandeliers. Towering centerpieces of white orchids and imported roses adorned every table. Waiters in immaculate white coats moved silently through the crowd, pouring vintage champagne into crystal flutes. The guests were the absolute picture of affluent society. Men in sharp tuxedos and women in stunning evening gowns mingled effortlessly. I could easily spot Vanessa's sorority sisters grouped together in their elegant salmon pink and apple green attire, laughing delicately at a joke Darius had just told. Vanessa stood at the center of the room, looking like a triumphant queen holding court. She clung to Darius's arm, her diamond ring flashing under the lights. They were putting on the performance of a lifetime, projecting the image of a powerful, untouchable power couple. My father Warren stood a few feet away, beaming with a pride I had never once seen him direct toward me. He signaled to one of the waiters, taking a fresh glass of champagne, and then motioned toward the string quartet to pause their music. My father stepped up to the microphone positioned near the head table. He tapped his glass with a silver spoon. The gentle chiming sound echoed through the speakers, immediately drawing the attention of the 200 elite guests. A hush fell over the room as all eyes turned to the patriarch of our family, friends, and esteemed guests. My father began, his voice booming with artificial authority. We are gathered here tonight to celebrate the union of two incredible families. When I look at my son Darius, I do not just see a groom. I see the embodiment of Black excellence. I see a visionary, a successful entrepreneur, and a man who has built a remarkable legacy with his own two hands. Sitting in my car, I let out a dry, humorless laugh. Built with his own two hands. It was an astonishing lie. Darius had not built a single thing in his entire life. He had destroyed a startup, burned through investor capital, and stolen from his own sister to fund the very suit he was wearing. Yet here was my father standing in front of federal judges and hospital board members, selling them a complete fantasy. My father continued his speech, raising his glass higher. And to Vanessa's family, I want to say thank you for welcoming my son. You are gaining a brilliant, resourceful man who will lead your daughter into a future filled with nothing but prosperity. To Darius and Vanessa. The guests raised their glasses in unison. A chorus of polite cheers and applause rippled through the grand ballroom. Darius smiled broadly, soaking up the unearned admiration. He leaned in to kiss Vanessa, who looked thoroughly satisfied with her new elevated status. That was the exact moment the automated safety protocol engaged. When Elijah revoked the special event insurance policy, the municipal fire safety grid immediately registered the venue as non-compliant. The Obsidian estate was equipped with a state-of-the-art integrated security system designed to prevent mass casualty events in uninsured or hazardous conditions. Once the system lost the digital insurance verification, it executed an automatic shutdown sequence. Right as Darius's lips touched Vanessa's, the massive crystal chandeliers abruptly powered down. The golden glow vanished instantly, plunging the spectacular ballroom into pitch-black darkness. The microphone in my father's hand let out a sharp, piercing screech of feedback before going completely dead. The sudden absolute loss of power caused a collective gasp to echo through the crowd. For 3 agonizing seconds, there was nothing but panicked darkness and the sound of breaking glass as someone dropped a champagne flute in shock. Then the emergency strobes kicked in. Harsh, blinding, pulsating white lights began flashing rhythmically across the ceiling and walls. The romantic, curated atmosphere was completely obliterated, replaced by the sterile, alarming glare of an emergency evacuation system. An automated siren began to wail a loud, repetitive blare that cut through the confusion like a knife. "What is going on?" I heard. Vanessa shriek, her voice capturing the microphone's ambient audio before it completely shut off. The security cameras switched to night vision mode, rendering the glamorous crowd in sharp, chaotic contrast. Darius looked around frantically, his perfectly composed facade shattering in real time. He grabbed a passing waiter by the arm, shouting something I could not hear over the siren. My parents were clustered together, looking up at the flashing strobe lights in sheer terror. The elite guest people who were accustomed to flawless execution and VIP treatment began to murmur loudly, their faces twisting with indignation and panic. Outside the gates of the estate, the wail of approaching sirens grew louder. I looked through my rearview mirror and saw the flashing red and white lights of two massive county fire engines turning into the long driveway. The dispatch had been incredibly fast. The fire marshal was not taking any chances with an uninsured venue hosting hundreds of people. The heavy trucks rumbled past my parked Maybach, heading straight for the main entrance. Back on my dashboard screen, the ballroom doors swung wide open. Clara, the venue manager, marched into the room. She was not alone. The executive chef, still wearing his white coat, flanked her on the right, and three venue security guards flanked her on the left. Clara carried a battery-powered megaphone, her expression strictly professional and entirely unbothered by the chaos. Clara raised the megaphone. Her voice boomed over the emergency sirens echoing off the marble walls. "Ladies and gentlemen, I need your immediate attention. Please remain calm and listen carefully." The crowd quieted slightly, though the tension in the room was palpable. Vanessa's father, the federal judge, pushed his way to the front of the crowd, demanding to know why his daughter's wedding reception was being treated like a crime scene. "I apologize for the sudden interruption," Clara announced, her tone leaving absolutely no room for debate. However, as of exactly 4 minutes ago, the special event liability insurance policy for this gathering was officially revoked by the primary policyholder. Under municipal safety regulations and commercial fire codes, it is illegal for us to host an event of this size without active insurance coverage. The murmurs erupted into outright shouts. "Revoked. Uninsured." The words bounced around the room as the elite guests processed the sheer embarrassment of the situation. These were people who planned events years in advance, people who understood the fundamental importance of contracts and capital. To have a wedding shut down for lack of insurance was not just an inconvenience. It was a massive, humiliating scandal. By order of the county fire marshal, who has just arrived on the premises, this building must be evacuated immediately. Clara continued, gesturing toward the main exits. "We cannot serve food. We cannot serve alcohol. The kitchen has been shut down and the staff is currently packing up. I must ask all guests to proceed in an orderly fashion to the front exits. This event is officially canceled." The fallout was instantaneous. Vanessa let out a blood-curdling scream, dropping her bridal bouquet onto the floor. She turned on Darius, her face twisted in a mixture of horror and rage. "What is she talking about, Darius? What do you mean the insurance is revoked? You told me you handled all the venue paperwork." Darius held his hands up defensively, sweating profusely under the harsh strobe lights. "I did. I handled it. This is a mistake. It has to be a system glitch. Give me a second, babe. I will fix it. I will fix it right now." He pushed past Vanessa and marched aggressively toward Clara. "Do you know who I am?" Darius shouted, his voice cracking with panic. "I rented this entire estate. You cannot just kick us out. My father-in-law is a federal judge. Turn the lights back on and serve the dinner. I will call whoever I need to call tomorrow morning to sort out the paperwork." Clara did not flinch. She lowered the megaphone and looked Darius squarely in the eyes. "I do not care if your father-in-law is the President of the United States, sir. The insurance policy covering your specific event was canceled by the owner of the limited liability company. The fire marshal is standing in the lobby right now, ready to start issuing citations. If you want to keep these guests inside this building, you need to provide a valid active insurance policy, and you need to pay the emergency venue retention fee right this second. Otherwise, everyone leaves." Vanessa's father stepped up beside Darius, his authoritative presence commanding the space. What is the meaning of this, Darius? The judge demanded, his voice dangerously low. Why is this manager telling us your event is uninsured? We have colleagues, state senators, and hospital executives in this room. You are making us look like fools. Fix this immediately. My mother Yvonne rushed over, trying to physically shield Darius from the judge's glaring eyes. It is just a minor clerical error, Warren. Tell them it is a clerical error. Darius is a very busy chief executive officer. His assistant probably missed an email. We will write a check right now and clear this up. Darius nodded frantically, wiping sweat from his forehead. Exactly. It is a clerical error. I will handle the fee right now. How much is the emergency retention fee? Clara pulled a tablet from her clipboard, tapping the screen a few times. To override the system, read a temporary commercial liability binder and pay the hazard penalty for the staff. The immediate cost is $25,000. It must be paid in full right now, and it must clear the system before the fire marshal will allow anyone to stay. The sum caused a ripple of shocked whispers to spread through the nearby guests. $25,000 demanded on the spot. For people of their supposed wealth, it should have been an annoyance, a simple swipe of a premium credit card to save the evening. Vanessa crossed her arms, looking at Darius expectantly. Her parents watched him closely, waiting for the wealthy tech entrepreneur they had been promised to resolve the crisis effortlessly. I sat in my car, my eyes locked on the screen, a wide smile spreading across my face. This was the moment. The exact moment the illusion would shatter. Darius patted his tuxedo jacket, his hands shaking slightly as he reached into his inner pocket. He pulled out a sleek, heavy metal corporate credit card. It was the exact card I had issued him 2 years ago to help him restructure his debts. The card he had been using to fund his entire fake lifestyle. The card Elijah had frozen and flagged for fraud just 10 minutes ago. I have it right here, Darius said, trying to project a confident, commanding tone that completely failed to mask his desperation. Run the card. Charge the $25,000. Just get the lights back on before my wife has a panic attack. Clara took the heavy metal card. She produced a mobile point-of-sale terminal from her apron pocket. She inserted the chip. I watched the screen intently. The guests held their breath. My parents watched with nervous anticipation. Darius stood tall, adjusting his tie, ready to be the hero who saved the day with his endless supply of capital. Clara waited. The machine processed, and then a loud, sharp, undeniable beep echoed from the terminal. I leaned forward in my seat, my heart beating with pure, unadulterated satisfaction. The trap had snapped shut. The dominoes were falling, and there was absolutely nothing my brother could do to stop the devastating crash. The sharp beep from the mobile terminal cut through the tense silence of the grand ballroom. From my dashboard screen, I watched Clara stare at the small digital display. She did not blink. She did not attempt to swipe the card a second time. She simply looked up at my brother with an expression of absolute professional pity. I am sorry, sir, Clara said, her voice projecting clearly over the low hum of the emergency sirens. This card has been declined. Darius let out a forced, nervous laugh, looking around at the guests as if sharing a joke. He waved his hand dismissively. Run it again. It is a fraud alert. My bank always flags large, unexpected charges on the weekend to protect my assets. Just bypass the security prompt and run it as a credit transaction. Clara shook her head. The flashing strobe lights caught the sleek metal of the corporate card as she held it out between two fingers, refusing to hand it back immediately. I cannot run it again, she stated. The system is locked. The specific error code on my screen reads, declined. Fraudulent activity reported. Account frozen by primary card holder. The words echoed. Account frozen by primary card holder. Darius froze. His confident posture crumbled, his shoulders slumping as the blood rushed out of his face. He reached out and snatched the card from Clara's hand, shoving it deep into his tuxedo pocket. He leaned in, attempting to pull Clara aside by her elbow to lower his voice, desperately trying to keep the conversation private from Vanessa and her elite family. Clara firmly stepped back, refusing to let him touch her. She maintained a professional distance, keeping everything entirely public. Listen to me, Darius hissed, his voice cracking with sheer panic. I have cash in the bridal suite. I can write you a personal check right now. Just tell the fire marshal we are handling it. Tell him the system made an error. Do not do this to me in front of these people. I will give you a $5,000 cash tip if you just keep the lights on for 1 more hour. I smiled from the driver's seat of my Maybach. Darius was begging. The golden child, the man who had just told me I did not fit the aesthetic of his luxury lifestyle, was offering phantom cash to a venue manager to stop the walls from closing in. Sir Clara replied, her tone unyielding. I cannot accept a personal check for an emergency municipal fee, and I certainly cannot accept a bribe to violate federal fire codes. You need to provide a valid active credit card under your name to clear the $25,000 charge immediately, or I will be forced to ask your guests to proceed to the exits. Vanessa stood frozen in her custom Vera Wang gown. The horrific reality was beginning to dawn on her. Her entire bridal party, the women she had spent months curating the perfect aesthetic with, were now whispering frantically behind their manicured hands. The embarrassment was suffocating. In their world, a declined card was not just a financial inconvenience. It was a massive, unforgivable social sin. It signaled a lack of preparation, a lack of status, and worst of all, a lack of actual wealth. What is happening right now? Vanessa demanded, stepping up to Darius and grabbing his arm. Why is your card declining? You told me you paid for everything. You told me the venue was fully secured. Darius, my friends are watching. My colleagues are watching. Fix this. Darius swallowed hard, wiping a bead of sweat from his forehead. It is a mistake, Vanessa. I swear to you. My assistant must have used the wrong account for the insurance binder. The bank flagged the emergency fee. It is just a security measure. I just need to call my wealth manager and authorize the release of funds. Before he could even pull his phone from his pocket, a towering figure pushed through the crowd. Judge Harrison, Vanessa's father, stepped directly into the space between Darius and Clara. The judge was a man who commanded courtrooms, a man whose reputation was built on absolute integrity, power, and zero tolerance for foolishness. He looked at Darius with a gaze so cold it could freeze water. Put your phone away, Darius! The judge ordered, his deep voice slicing through the chaotic noise of the room. You are embarrassing my daughter, and you are embarrassing this family. Judge Harrison, please. Darius stammered, holding his hands up defensively. I can explain. It is a banking error. You know how these high-limit corporate cards are. The fraud department is overly cautious. Do not insult my intelligence, the judge snapped. I heard exactly what the venue manager said. The account was frozen by the primary cardholder. Who is the primary cardholder, Darius? I thought you were the chief executive officer of your own tech firm. Why would anyone else have the authority to freeze your accounts? The silence that followed was deafening. My father, Warren, rushed forward, desperate to run interference and protect the family name. He placed a hand on the judge's shoulder, putting on his most charming diplomatic smile. Arthur, let us not jump to conclusions, Warren said, attempting to defuse the ticking time bomb. You know how corporate structures work. Darius has a board of directors. He has financial officers. Someone probably triggered an automatic lock. Let me handle this. I will put down my own card to clear the fee, and we can get the music playing again. No harm done. I watched my father reach for his wallet, and I almost laughed out loud. Warren was a proud man, but he was completely broke. He had secretly remortgaged his suburban home just to keep up appearances for this wedding. The credit cards in his wallet were maxed out. I was offering to pay a $25,000 fee with plastic that would decline just as fast as Darius's stolen corporate card. The judge did not back down. He brushed Warren's hand off his shoulder with a look of utter disgust. Do not touch me, Warren, and keep your wallet in your pocket. This is not about the money. This is about the principle. My daughter is standing in a dark room with flashing emergency lights because the man she is supposed to marry lied about his financial standing. Judge, that is not true, Darius pleaded, his voice climbing an octave. I have the money. I just cannot access it right this second. The bank is closed. Clara cleared her throat, remaining the anchor of reality in the sea of their delusions. Gentlemen, the fire marshal is giving me exactly 2 minutes before he begins manually clearing the building. I need a valid form of payment immediately, or the doors will be locked. Warren hastily pulled a gold credit card from his leather wallet and shoved it toward Clara. Here, run this. Put the $25,000 on this card. Let us end this circus. Clara took the card, inserted it into the terminal, and waited. The seconds ticked by. Darius stared at the screen, praying for a miracle. Vanessa looked at her father, tears of sheer humiliation pooling in her eyes. The terminal beeped again, loud, sharp, and final. Clara looked at Warren, handing the gold card back to him. Declined, sir. Insufficient funds. A collective gasp echoed through the ballroom. The whispers from the elite guests turned into audible judgments. They were witnessing the spectacular, undeniable financial collapse of a family that had spent months bragging about their wealth. Vanessa's mother, a woman who served on hospital boards and prided herself on immaculate social standing, covered her face with her hands, entirely mortified. Insufficient funds. Warren stammered, staring at his card as if it had betrayed him. That is impossible. Try it again. The machine must be broken. The machine is functioning perfectly, Clara said, taking a step back. I am sorry, but I have to follow protocol. This event is terminated. Please direct your attention to the exit signs. Judge Harrison turned to Darius, his expression hardening into absolute stone. You lied to us, he said quietly, his voice carrying more weight than a scream. You came to my home. You asked for my daughter's hand. You sat at my dining table and promised me you could provide her with a life of luxury and stability. You bragged about your tech company. You bragged about your investments. And now, you are trying to pay for your own wedding reception with declined credit cards and phantom bank accounts. Darius was hyperventilating now. The sweat poured down his temples, staining the crisp white collar of his expensive tuxedo shirt. Sir, I swear to you my business is fine. I just had a slight cash flow issue this quarter. The market is tough. My investors are restructuring. I promise you I will make this right. Just give me a chance to call my bank in the morning. There will be no morning, the judge declared, his voice booming with finality. You are a fraud, Darius. You are a broke, manipulative fraud who used my daughter to elevate your own pathetic status. You thought you could fake your way into our family. You thought we would not find out. Vanessa burst into tears, dropping her face into her hands. Her bridesmaids immediately surrounded her, forming a protective circle of silk and tulle, shielding her from the humiliating stares of the guests. One of the bridesmaids glared at Darius, shaking her head in sheer disgust. Vanessa, please, Darius begged, stepping toward her. Do not let this ruin tonight. We love each other. The money does not matter. We can fix this. Do not speak to her, the judge roared, stepping between Darius and the bridesmaids. You have humiliated her enough for one lifetime. You have humiliated all of us. I sat in my car, mesmerized by the flawless execution of the collapse. Every single lie Darius had told over the past 2 years was unraveling in a matter of minutes. He had built his entire identity on the foundation of my hard work, my capital, and my silence. He had treated me like a stepping stone, a disposable asset to be used and discarded whenever it suited his aesthetic needs. Now, he was falling from the top of the tower he had stolen, and there was absolutely no one left to catch him. Yvonne rushed forward, grabbing the judge's arm, tears streaming down her carefully made-up face. Arthur, please, you must understand. Darius is a good man. He is a brilliant entrepreneur. He just hit a rough patch. Do not do this to him. Do not ruin his wedding day. They love each other. Yvonne, the judge said coldly, pulling his arm away from her grasp. Your son is a liar. And judging by your desperate attempt to cover for him, I assume you knew about his financial ruin all along. You allowed my daughter to walk down the aisle and bind herself legally to a man who cannot even afford to keep the lights on at his own reception. Our family will not be dragged down into your poverty and your deceit. The word poverty hit Yvonne like a physical blow. She stumbled backward, her hand flying to her chest. For a woman who had spent her entire life chasing status, being publicly labeled as poor by a federal judge was the ultimate destruction. The fire marshal stepped into the ballroom, flanked by 2 armed security guards. He held up a radio, his expression stern. Ladies and gentlemen, this building is no longer cleared for occupancy. I need everyone to proceed immediately to the main exits. Do not run. Take your belongings and vacate the premises. The guests did not need to be told twice. The elite crowd, the state senators, the hospital executives, the Jack and Jill alumni, all turned in unison and began marching toward the doors. They whispered to each other, shaking their heads, casting side glances at Darius and my parents. The social ruin was absolute. Darius was no longer the brilliant tech CEO marrying into high society. I was the broke fraud who got kicked out of his own wedding for unpaid bills. Darius stood in the center of the dark ballroom, illuminated only by the flashing white strobe lights. He looked around at the fleeing guests, at the dark chandeliers, at the judge, staring at him with pure hatred. He was completely trapped, exposed, and humiliated. I smiled, turning off the dashboard screen. The appetizer was over. It was time for the main course. The mass exodus from the Obsidian estate was a sight I will carry with me for the rest of my life. I rolled down the tinted window of my Maybach, just enough to let the crisp night air in, listening to the symphony of clicking heels and panicked voices echoing across the immaculate courtyard. Women who had arrived in chauffeur-driven sedans were now lifting their heavy silk gowns, speed-walking toward the valet stand, while glancing nervously over their shoulders at the flashing emergency lights. Men were barking aggressively into their cell phones, demanding their drivers pull up immediately. The sheer desperation of the elite retreating from a social disaster was intoxicating. Then I saw her. My mother burst through the heavy glass doors, pushing past a state senator and his bewildered wife. Yvonne looked absolutely manic. Her emerald silk gown, which had looked so regal just 20 minutes ago, now seemed to hang awkwardly on her frame. She clutched her diamond necklace with one hand, while frantically digging through her designer clutch with the other. She marched away from the fleeing crowd, seeking refuge in the shadows of the manicured rose garden near the side of the courtyard. My phone vibrated in the cup holder, illuminating the dark cabin. The caller ID flashed my mother's name. I let it ring 3 times. I wanted her to sit in the panic. I wanted her to feel the exact level of anxiety she and my father had inflicted on me when they kicked me out of the foyer. On the 4th ring, I pressed the answer button and connected the call to the Bluetooth audio system. "Hello, Mom," I said, my voice perfectly level, completely devoid of any emotion. "Naomi, what have you done?" she screamed. Her voice was so shrill, so loaded with absolute hysteria that it vibrated through the high-end speakers of my car. "I know this was you. I know you are behind this." Behind what I asked, leaning back into the headrest, keeping my eyes fixed on her tiny figure pacing furiously in the courtyard just 50 yards away. "Do not play innocent with me, you vicious, jealous girl," she shrieked, entirely abandoning any pretense of maternal affection. "Darius just told me everything. He said his bank accounts were frozen. He said a malicious fraud alert was placed on his corporate card right at the exact moment he needed to pay the venue manager. He said it takes someone with high-level financial clearance to execute a targeted freeze like that on a Saturday night. You used your Wall Street connections to hack his company accounts. You shut off his money to humiliate him in front of Vanessa's family." I sat in the car, genuinely astounded by the Olympic-level mental gymnastics my mother was performing. Instead of looking at the very obvious truth that her son was a broke pathological liar, she had instantly constructed an elaborate conspiracy theory where I was a financial supervillain hacking into banking mainframes just to ruin his wedding. "You think I hacked a bank, Mom?" I asked, my tone dripping with dry amusement. "I know you did," she yelled, her breath hitching in a panic. "You have always been insanely jealous of your brother. You have always resented him because he has the charisma and the vision that you lack. You could never stand the fact that he was building a tech empire while you just moved other people's money around. And tonight, when you saw him stepping into a family of real prestige, you could not handle it. You could not stand seeing him happy. So you pulled some illegal corporate favor to freeze his assets." The sheer delusion was breathtaking. She was standing outside a venue that was currently being evacuated by the fire marshal because her son could not pay a basic emergency fee, and her first instinct was to protect his fragile ego by turning me into the monster. It validated every single decision I had made tonight. "You are destroying your brother's life, Naomi." My mother cried, her voice cracking with desperation. "Vanessa's father is threatening to cancel the marriage. The guests are leaving. This is a catastrophe. I am ordering you to call whoever you called and undo this right now. Call your bankers. Call your financial executives. Tell them it was a mistake. Unfreeze his corporate card immediately so he can pay this venue manager and get the lights turned back on. Fix this, Naomi. Fix this right now, or I swear to God, you will never be a part of this family again." I listened to her, panting heavily into the phone. I looked through the windshield. I could see her pacing near a stone fountain, clutching her phone to her ear, looking around frantically as the flashing red and white lights from the fire engines painted her face in harsh, chaotic colors. "Are you finished?" I asked quietly. "No, I am not finished," she snapped back. "Unfreeze his card." I took a slow, deep breath. The time for letting them live in their comfortable fantasy had officially expired. It was time to pull back the curtain and force them to look at the ugly, rotting reality they had created. "Mom, listen to me very carefully," I said, my voice dropping to a low, commanding register that commanded absolute attention. "I did not hack into a bank. I did not use illegal Wall Street connections to freeze his assets. And Darius does not have a tech empire. He does not have a company. He does not have a board of directors. He does not have investors." "What are you talking about?" she spat, refusing to yield. "High as a chief executive officer. High as unemployed," I corrected sharply. "His tech startup went completely bankrupt 2 years ago. He burned through every cent of his seed funding on luxury cars and expensive vacations. He failed. He lost everything. He has been entirely broke for 24 months. "You are lying," my mother gasped, though I could hear the faint tremor of doubt creeping into her voice. "Your father would have told me. Warren knows everything about Darius's business." "Dad does know," I replied, striking the next nerve. "Dad knew Darius was facing criminal negligence charges from his investors 2 years ago. Dad knew Darius was completely ruined. And instead of letting his golden boy face the consequences, Dad came to me. He begged me to bail him out. He begged me to absorb Darius's massive debt into my venture capital firm to save him from going to federal prison." "That is a lie," she whispered, the aggressive fire in her voice suddenly flickering out. "Warren would never keep something like that from me. Darius is successful. He paid for this entire wedding. He did not pay for anything, Mom. He has no money. He forged Dad's signature to take out a second mortgage on your house just to cover the floral arrangements and the caterers. Your house is heavily leveraged, Mom. You are practically in foreclosure right now, and you do not even know it." "No, no, no," she stammered, the reality beginning to crack through her thick armor of denial. "He had a card. He gave the manager a heavy metal corporate card. I saw it." "Yes, you did see it," I said, leaning forward in my seat, my eyes locked on her distant figure in the courtyard. "And that brings me to the reality of your current situation." I let the silence hang for 3 full seconds, ensuring she was clinging to every single word. "You demanded that I unfreeze the corporate card," I said, my voice as cold and sharp as cracked ice. "You do not get it, Mom. I cannot call a banker to fix this because I am the banker. That black corporate card Darius just tried to swipe, it does not belong to his tech company. It is registered to my LLC. It is my corporate account. I gave it to him 2 years ago for basic living expenses while he supposedly got back on his feet. Instead, he has been using my money to fund this entire fraudulent lifestyle. He used my money to buy Vanessa's ring. He used my money to rent his car, and he tried to use my money to pay for this wedding reception tonight." My mother let out a strangled, breathless sound. I could see her on the other side of the courtyard, freezing in place. Her hand dropped slightly, the phone slipping a few inches from her ear before she pressed it back tightly. "You froze the card," she whispered, her voice stripped of all its former arrogance. It was a realization of pure horror. "I froze my card," I corrected her. "Because I am done funding a 34-year-old fraud who disrespects me at the door of the very building he is using to impress his new family." "But the venue," she pleaded, her voice cracking into a pathetic, desperate whine. "Naomi, please." The venue manager said the insurance was revoked by the owner. "The fire marshal is shutting the whole building down. We are going to be ruined. If you have any heart left in you, please call the owner of the estate. Use your money. Pay whatever they want. Fix the insurance. We will do anything. We will apologize. Just do not let Vanessa's family see us like this." I watched her through the glass of my windshield. She was visibly shaking, now her entire body trembling, as the illusion of her perfect family disintegrated into ash. She was begging me to save them from the very trap they had gleefully walked into. I let out a slow, steady breath. This was the pinnacle, the absolute peak of the mountain I had climbed. "You still do not get it, Mom," I said, delivering the final fatal blow. "I do not need to call the owner of the estate, and the estate you are standing on, I am the sole owner. I pressed the red button on my steering wheel, immediately terminating the call. I did not wait for a response. I did not want to hear her scream or cry or beg. The line went completely dead, filling the cabin of my Maybach with a rich, heavy, satisfying silence. Through the windshield, I kept my eyes locked on my mother. She stood near the stone fountain, bathed in the flashing red lights of the fire engines. I watched the exact moment her brain processed the words I had just spoken. Her phone slipped from her trembling fingers, hitting the cobblestone pathway with a faint, muted clatter. She did not even reach down to pick it up. Her knees gave out. She staggered backward, collapsing heavily onto the stone edge of the fountain. She wrapped her arms around her stomach, rocking back and forth as the sheer magnitude of her mistake crushed the breath right out of her. She looked up at the towering dark facade of the obsidian estate, finally realizing that the magnificent fortress her son had claimed as his own was actually the kingdom of the daughter she had just thrown away. She was trembling. She was completely speechless. The power dynamic had not just flipped, it had been entirely rewritten legally, financially, and emotionally. They had messed with the wrong person, and now they were going to lose everything. I rolled up the tinted window of the Maybach, sealing away the sight of my mother crumpled by the fountain. I put the car in drive and pulled forward, moving slowly past the chaotic line of evacuating guests and blaring fire engines. I did not leave the property. Instead, I drove around the perimeter of the courtyard, parking in the reserved VIP spot directly adjacent to the venue's grand entrance. As I stepped out of the vehicle, the cool night air hit my face again, but this time it carried the distinct electric charge of absolute victory. A sleek black SUV pulled up right behind my car. The doors opened in unison. Elijah stepped out, adjusting his crisp charcoal suit, clutching a thick leather briefcase that held the financial and legal ruin of my brother. He was not alone. Flanking him were two men in dark windbreakers with gold badges clipped to their belts. They were detectives from the Financial Fraud Division of the police department. Contacts Elijah had coordinated with earlier in the week when we finalized the evidence of Darius's federal crimes. "Good evening, Naomi," Elijah said, his voice sharp and businesslike over the wail of the sirens. "The detectives are fully briefed. We have the forged mortgage documents, the unauthorized wire transfers, and the complete paper trail of the stolen corporate funds. They are ready to move." "Thank you, Elijah," I replied, smoothing the lapel of my jacket. "Let us go greet the groom." We walked toward the main entrance in a tight, formidable formation. The crowd of retreating elite guests parted for us like the Red Sea. They took one look at the two heavily built detectives and the absolute authority radiating from our group, and they stepped aside, whispering frantically. I saw Vanessa's bridesmaids huddled near the valet stand, their salmon-pink dresses shivering in the wind. They stopped talking the moment I walked past, their eyes wide with confusion and fear. As we approached the grand limestone steps, my mother was still sitting on the edge of the fountain. She looked up and saw me walking toward the doors I had been banished from just an hour ago. She tried to stand, reaching a trembling hand out toward me, her mouth opening to speak. I did not even look in her direction. I walked right past her, leaving her invisible in the dark. The heavy glass doors of the grand foyer were propped open by the fire department. Firefighters were actively directing angry, wealthy guests out of the building. When a firefighter held up a hand to stop my group from entering, Clara, my venue manager, rushed forward from the lobby. "Stand down," Clara instructed the firefighter, her voice echoing off the marble floors. "She is the owner of this estate. Let her through." The firefighter lowered his hand, stepping aside respectfully. I crossed the threshold of my own building, my heels clicking sharply against the polished stone. Elijah and the detectives followed closely behind. We bypassed the lobby and marched directly toward the grand ballroom where the remaining chaos was concentrated. Inside, the scene was a spectacular disaster. The emergency strobe lights were still flashing brilliant, blinding white across the high ceilings. The room was mostly empty now, stripped of the 200 guests who had fled to save their social standing. The only people left were the core players in this tragedy. Vanessa was sobbing uncontrollably into her hands, sitting slumped at the head table. Her father, the federal judge, was aggressively arguing with the chief fire marshal. My father, Warren, was pacing back and forth, frantically dialing numbers on his dead cell phone. And Darius stood in the center of the dance floor. He looked like a cornered animal. His custom ivory tuxedo jacket was discarded on a nearby chair. His tie was undone, hanging loosely around his neck. He was sweating, breathing heavily, and aggressively arguing with one of the venue security guards who was trying to push him toward the exit. "I need 5 more minutes," Darius yelled, his voice cracking with sheer desperation. "I am making a call. I am getting the money. Do not touch me." I stepped into the center of the ballroom. The sharp, rhythmic clicking of my heels echoed loudly, slicing right through the noise of the argument. "I is not getting the money," I announced. My voice was calm, steady, and amplified by the sheer acoustics of the massive room. Every single head turned toward the entrance. The judge stopped yelling at the fire marshal. Vanessa looked up, her mascara running down her cheeks in dark, messy streaks. My father froze, the cell phone slipping from his ear. Darius turned around. When he saw me standing there, flanked by Elijah and two stern-faced detectives, the remaining color drained completely from his face. His eyes darted from my tailored suit to the badges on the detectives' belts, and finally to the thick leather briefcase in Elijah's hand. The reality of his situation crashed into him like a freight train. I was not looking at the sister he could bully and discard. He was looking at his executioner. "What are you doing here?" Darius breathed, his voice trembling so violently he could barely form the words. "I told you to leave." I stepped further into the room, entirely unfazed by the flashing strobe lights and the suffocating tension. "I told you I would forget to invite you to the rest of your life, Darius. I am just here to make sure you pack up your things before I lock the doors to my property." "Your property?" Vanessa's father demanded, stepping forward with intense scrutiny. He looked from me to Darius, his judicial mind quickly piecing together the shifting power dynamic. "What is she talking about, Darius? Who is this woman?" Before Darius could answer, my father rushed forward. He stepped between me and the judge, throwing his hands up in a desperate, pathetic attempt to maintain control. "Naomi, stop this right now. You are taking this joke way too far. I demand that you leave this building immediately before you ruin your brother's life. You have made your point. Now get out." I did not even blink. I looked at Warren, the man who had happily thrown me to the wolves to protect his fraudulent son. "You do not demand anything in my building, Dad," I said, my voice dropping to a lethal whisper. "You do not have the money, the power, or the authority to tell me what to do ever again. You are a guest on my property, and your invitation has just been permanently revoked," Darius snapped. The sheer, undeniable humiliation of being exposed in front of his wealthy bride and her powerful father broke whatever fragile sanity he had left. He let out a raw, guttural scream of absolute rage. "You ruined everything," Darius roared, his face twisting into a mask of pure hatred. He lunged forward, throwing his entire body weight toward me with his fists clenched, fully intending to strike me down right there on the dance floor. He never made it past the second step. The two financial fraud detectives moved with lightning speed. The detective on the left intercepted Darius, grabbing him by the shoulder and spinning him around with brutal, practiced efficiency. The second detective grabbed his other arm, slamming Darius face first onto the nearest linen-covered dining table. The expensive crystal centerpieces shattered onto the floor, sending water and white orchids spilling across the hardwood. "Get your hands off me!" Darius screamed, thrashing wildly against the table as the detectives pinned his arms securely behind his back. "I am the groom. I paid for this. She is crazy. She is trying to ruin my life." I stood perfectly composed, completely motionless. I did not flinch when he lunged. I did not take a single step back. I simply reached up and calmly adjusted the lapel of my midnight blue suit jacket. I looked down at my brother, whose face was currently pressed against a spilled plate of caviar, and I felt nothing but cold, clinical satisfaction. "You ruined your own life, Darius," I said, my voice carrying effortlessly over his pathetic struggling. "I just stopped paying the bill." Vanessa screamed, jumping up from the head table and backing away in sheer terror. Her father, the judge, quickly moved to shield her, his eyes wide with alarm as he watched the groom being restrained by law enforcement. Warren stood frozen in shock, his hands trembling as he realized the absolute severity of the situation. This was no longer a family dispute. This was a criminal takedown. I turned to Clara and the fire marshal. "Lock the perimeter doors right now," I ordered smoothly. "Nobody leaves this room until my legal team says so. All the exits are sealed. The reckoning has officially started and no one escapes. We are going to finish this. Tonight." Judge Harrison stepped forward, pushing his daughter gently behind him to shield her from the chaos. His face was a mask of judicial fury, the kind of expression that sent criminals away for life. He looked at the two detectives pinning Darius to the table, then locked his steely gaze onto me. "I demand an explanation right now." The judge commanded, his voice reverberating through the vast, dimly lit room. "You claim to own this property. You bring law enforcement into my daughter's wedding reception. You order the doors sealed. Who exactly are you, and what are the charges against this man?" Before I could open my mouth, Darius began thrashing against the grip of the detectives. He twisted his neck, lifting his cheek off the caviar-stained tablecloth just enough to shout across the room, "Do not listen to her." Arthur, Darius screamed, his voice strained and frantic. "She is my sister, but she is completely insane. She is mentally unstable. She has been obsessed with ruining my life ever since we were kids because she is jealous. She forged paperwork to make it look like I owe her money. She is a psychotic, bitter woman who cannot handle the fact that I am successful and she is entirely alone." He looked wildly at Vanessa, who was shaking behind her father. "Nessa, baby, look at me. Look at me. She is having a manic episode. She set this whole thing up to frame me because I did not invite her tonight. Just tell the officers to let me go. We can call my lawyers and sort out her delusions in the morning." I did not argue with him. I did not defend my sanity. Arguing with a narcissist is a waste of oxygen, and I had brought something far more effective than words. I extended my right hand. Elijah, standing perfectly rigid at my side, unclasped his thick leather briefcase. He reached inside and pulled out a massive, heavy financial dossier. It was bound in thick black leather, and the front cover was stamped with the bright red seal of a federal forensic accounting firm. I carefully took the heavy file from Elijah. I walked slowly toward the main dining table, my heels clicking sharply against the hardwood floor. I stopped directly in front of Judge Harrison and Vanessa. I looked down at the shattered crystal, the spilled champagne, and the ruined floral arrangements. I cleared a space with the back of my hand, sweeping a silver charger plate out of the way, and I dropped the dossier onto the table. The heavy binder hit the wood with a loud, resounding thud that echoed into the high ceilings. "I do not need to argue with a man who is currently wearing handcuffs," I said, my voice projecting crisp and clear. "I let the paper trail do the talking. Judge Harrison, you are a man who respects evidence. I invite you to open that file." The judge hesitated for a fraction of a second, his eyes darting from my calm, unwavering face to the frantic, sweating mess that was my brother. Then the judge reached out and flipped open the heavy leather cover. Vanessa peeked over her father's shoulder, her tear-stained eyes scanning the top document. "Let us address the first lie," I announced, turning my body so I could address both the bride's family and my own father, who was standing frozen near the dance floor. "Darius has spent the last 2 years parading around your country clubs, attending your Jack and Jill galas, and sitting in your living room claiming to be the visionary chief executive officer of a disruptive technology firm." Vanessa sniffled, wiping her nose with the back of her hand. "He is a CEO. I have been to his office building. I have seen his pitch decks. You saw a rented co-working space that he paid for by the hour to stage meetings." I corrected her, gently offering her a massive dose of the harsh, unfiltered truth. "If you look at the first red tab in that binder, Judge, you will see the official federal bankruptcy filings. Darius's tech startup went completely insolvent exactly 24 months ago. High burned through his entire seed funding round in less than 90 days. He bought a luxury sports car, he took extravagant trips to Dubai, and he never wrote a single line of viable code. He was facing massive criminal negligence lawsuits from his angel investors until a silent venture capital firm stepped in, absorbed his debt, and liquidated the remaining assets to keep him out of federal prison." I paused, letting the heavy silence stretch out for maximum impact. "That silent venture capital firm is my company. I bailed him out. He has not had a job, a company, or a single cent of legitimate income in 2 entire years." Vanessa let out a small, wounded gasp. She looked at Darius, her expression shifting from terror to absolute betrayal. "You told me you were closing a Series B funding round next month," she whispered, her voice breaking. "You told me we were moving into a penthouse in the financial district." "I am," Darius shouted from the table, struggling futilely against the massive detectives. "The paperwork is just tied up in escrow. Nessa, do not read that trash. She fabricated all of it. Turn to the second tab. Judge, I instructed, completely ignoring my brother's pathetic wailing. The judge turned the thick, glossy pages. His brow furrowed as he scanned the highly detailed banking statements. The lines on his face deepened into a scowl of pure disgust. As I mentioned outside, I continued pacing slowly across the front of the head table. My brother tried to pay the $25,000 emergency fire marshal fee tonight with a heavy metal corporate card. That card is registered to my personal LLC. I issued it to him 2 years ago with a strict, legally binding contract that it was to be used exclusively for authorized business restructuring expenses and basic survival necessities while he found a legitimate job. Instead, he has been committing brazen corporate theft. I pointed directly at the open dossier. Every single detail of this $150,000 wedding was stolen directly from my corporate accounts. The $80,000 venue deposit, the $15,000 for those imported white orchids you are holding, the $40,000 catering bill, even the custom Vera Wang gown you are wearing right now, Vanessa. All of it was financed through illegal wire transfers and fraudulent credit swipes orchestrated by the man you were about to marry. Vanessa looked down at her dress as if it were suddenly covered in poison. She stumbled backward, bumping into one of her bridesmaids, breathing heavily as a full-blown panic attack began to set in. My dress, she sobbed. My ring, everything is stolen, everything is fake. It gets worse. Elijah spoke up, stepping forward to stand shoulder to shoulder with me. He looked directly at my father, Warren, who was visibly shaking near the edge of the dance floor. Because stealing from his sister's firm was not enough to cover the extravagant lifestyle he needed to maintain his fake persona. I turned my gaze to my father. Warren had been the architect of this monster. He had coddled Darius, protected him, and enabled his delusions of grandeur while treating my actual hard-earned success as a communal piggy bank. It was time for Warren to understand exactly what his blind loyalty had cost him. Dad, I said, my voice devoid of any sympathy. Did you ever wonder how Darius managed to secure the second massive down payment for the floral arrangements and the open bar after I put a spending alert on his corporate card last month? Warren stared at me, his eyes wide and panicked. What are you talking about, Naomi? I gave him some cash to help out, just a few $1,000s from my savings. Turn to the third tab, Judge Harrison, I commanded. The judge flipped this page. He let out a sharp, heavy breath, shaking his head in absolute disbelief. These are property deeds, the judge said aloud. And loan origination documents. Yes, they are. I confirmed, never breaking eye contact with my father. Dad, your golden boy did not just steal from me. He ran out of my money 4 weeks ago. So he went looking for another source of capital. He found the physical deed to the suburban home you and Mom have lived in for 30 years. He took it to a predatory lending agency downtown. Warren took a stumbling step forward, his hands trembling violently. No, no, he does not have access to my property documents. The house is fully paid off. I paid it off 5 years ago. You did, I agreed coldly. But Darius needed cash fast to keep playing the role of a billionaire for Vanessa's family. So he forged your signature. He forged Mom's signature. He used a fake notary stamp, and he took out a high-interest second mortgage on your fully paid-off family home. He leveraged the entire property for a lump sum of $200,000, which he immediately dumped into a joint checking account to prove to Vanessa's father that he had liquid assets. The absolute horror that washed over my father's face was indescribable. All the color drained from his cheeks. He clutched his chest, his breathing becoming shallow and erratic as the realization struck him. The son he had protected, the son he had chosen over me, the son he had literally kicked me out of the building to defend, had secretly stolen his entire life savings. Darius Warren gasped, his voice cracking into a high, fragile wheeze. He looked at the man pinned to the table by the detectives. Tell me she is lying. Tell me you did not mortgage our house. Darius stopped struggling. The fight completely left his body. He went limp against the table, pressing his face into the ruined tablecloth. He did not answer. He could not answer. The silence was the loudest, most devastating confession in the history of our family. He cannot tell you that, Dad, I said quietly, the finality of my words ringing through the empty ballroom. Because the money is gone. He blew the entire loan on the deposits for the honeymoon to Bora Bora, the luxury car rentals, and the designer watches for his groomsmen. Your house currently belongs to a private equity lender and the first payment is due next week. Warren collapsed onto his knees. He did not gracefully lower himself. His legs simply gave out entirely. He fell hard onto the polished hardwood floor, burying his face in his hands, letting out a wretched guttural sob that echoed painfully in the silent room. All of his pride, all of his arrogant posturing at the front door was entirely annihilated. The golden child had destroyed his own parents to maintain a hollow illusion. I stood perfectly still watching the absolute destruction of the men who had spent my entire life telling me I was simply not good enough to succeed. I truly felt no pity for them at all. The ironclad evidence had brutally obliterated every single toxic lie they had ever told to protect their fragile egos. The dossier on the table was not just a collection of financial documents. It was the absolute undeniable proof of my superiority and their complete moral bankruptcy. Judge Harrison closed the heavy leather dossier. He did not just slam it shut. He closed it with a truly terrifying, incredibly deliberate calmness. He looked at Darius, who was still pinned to the table, and then he looked at Warren, who was weeping on the floor. The judge adjusted his glasses, his face set in an expression of pure, unadulterated judicial wrath. The unmasking was completely finished. The fraudulent prince had been stripped of his stolen crown forever. The stage was now perfectly set for the final brutal execution of absolute unyielding legal justice tonight. The heavy silence in the ballroom was broken only by the muffled, pathetic sobs of my father kneeling on the hardwood floor. My mother Yvonne finally snapped out of her paralyzed state. She rushed forward, her emerald silk gown rustling loudly in the quiet room, and dropped to her knees beside him. She wrapped her arms around his shaking shoulders, glaring up at me with an expression of pure, cornered panic. "How could you do this?" Yvonne screamed, her voice echoing off the high ceilings. "You are destroying your own father. You are tearing this family apart over money. We can fix this. We just need time to figure out the loans. You did not have to humiliate us in front of these people." I looked down at her, feeling absolutely nothing. The illusion of my mother as a dignified high society matriarch was completely gone. She was just a desperate woman trying to hold on to a lie that had already shattered into a million pieces. "I did not destroy him, Mom," I said calmly. "He destroyed himself the moment he decided my corporate accounts were an open buffet for his favorite son." Judge Harrison stepped forward, his imposing frame casting a long shadow over my kneeling parents. He looked from the financial dossier on the table down to Warren. His voice was dangerously quiet, vibrating with barely contained rage. "Warren," the judge said, demanding absolute attention, "did you know about this? Did you know your son was a bankrupt fraud when you sat in my study and promised me he was a suitable match for my daughter?" Warren kept his face buried in his hands. He could not look at the judge. He could not look at Vanessa. He just shook his head back and forth in a frantic, pathetic motion. He did not know Yvonne cried out desperately, trying to run interference. Warren thought the business was doing well. Darius told us the company was restructuring. We are victims here too. Naomi is just trying to make us look complicit because she has always resented our relationship with her brother. Elijah stepped forward, a cold, predatory smile playing on his lips. He reached into his leather briefcase and pulled out a sleek silver flash drive. He held it up so the emergency strobe lights caught the metal surface. "I highly advise against committing perjury in front of a federal judge, ma'am," Elijah said smoothly, "because we have the corporate email logs. We also have the recorded phone calls from the bank's fraud department." Warren flinched violently at the mention of the bank logs. He finally lifted his head, his face a terrifying shade of gray. The deep lines around his mouth and eyes made him look incredibly fragile, completely stripped of the arrogant authority he had wielded at the front doors just an hour ago. Dad knew everything, I announced, ensuring my voice carried to the back of the room where the remaining venue security guards stood watching. I turned my attention directly to Vanessa and the judge. My father was fully aware that Darius lost his tech startup 2 years ago. In fact, my father was the one who came to my office and begged me to absorb the debt to keep his golden boy out of federal prison. He knew exactly why I issued that corporate card. Vanessa gasped. taking another step away from my parents, as if their deceit was contagious. "You knew," she whispered, her voice trembling with absolute betrayal. "You sat at our dining table last week and bragged about his software patents. You knew he had nothing." Warren swallowed hard, his eyes darting frantically around the room. "Arthur, please," he croaked, looking up at the judge. "I was trying to protect my son. I was trying to give him a chance to start over. He just needed a little more time to get the new business off the ground. I thought if he married Vanessa, if he secured his place in your family, he would finally have the stability he needed to succeed." "You used my daughter as a financial rehabilitation plan," the judge roared, his voice booming like thunder. "You actively conspired to trap my child in a marriage with a penniless criminal just to save your own pathetic social standing." Warren scrambled to his feet, holding his hands up in a placating gesture. He turned to me, his eyes wide and desperate. "Naomi, please. Tell them it was a misunderstanding. I did not know he was stealing from your company. I thought he was just using his allowance." I stared at him, letting the silence stretch out, forcing him to sit in the uncomfortable reality of his own lies. "Stop lying, Dad," I said, my tone flat and uncompromising. "We pulled the security logs from the bank. We have the voice recordings of you calling the customer service line 3 months ago. You authorized a limit increase on the shadow account by impersonating my chief financial officer. You helped Darius bypass the security protocols so he could wire the venue deposit for this exact building." The color completely drained from Yvonne's face. She looked at her husband in sheer horror. "Warren, what is she talking about? You told me you took out a small personal loan to help with the wedding." "He lied to you too, Mom," I said, crossing my arms. "He helped Darius steal from me, and then he let Darius forge your signature to mortgage the house you are living in. I burned everything to the ground just to keep up appearances." Warren's chest heaved. He looked at me, shedding the last remnants of his dignity, and resorted to the only weapon he had left. He tried to make me the villain. "So what if I did?" Warren shouted, his voice cracking with desperate, ugly entitlement. "You have millions of dollars, Naomi. You make more money in a month than this entire family has seen in a decade. You barely even check those accounts. We figured you made enough money anyway. You have an empire. Your brother just needed a temporary boost. It was a drop in the bucket for you." The absolute audacity of his justification hung in the cold air. Vanessa's bridesmaids gasped audibly. Even the financial detectives pinning Darius to the table exchanged a look of pure disbelief. My father genuinely believed that my hard-earned wealth was his personal slush fund simply because we shared a last name. "You figured I made enough money anyway," I repeated, ensuring every single syllable was laced with ice. "So that gave you the right to help him steal from my company. That gave you the right to jeopardize my venture capital firm. That gave you the right to stand on the steps of my property tonight and tell me I was an embarrassment to the family." Warren took a step toward me, his hands clasped together in a pleading gesture. "Naomi, he is your brother. We are your family. We share the same blood. You cannot do this to us. You cannot stand here and destroy our lives over a wedding. Are you really going to send your own flesh and blood to prison over a wedding reception?" I looked at the man who had spent 32 years making me feel completely invisible. I looked at the man who had ordered me to leave the premises just an hour ago to protect the delicate sensibilities of his new in-laws. I felt no anger anymore. I felt nothing but absolute crystalline clarity. "No," I said, my voice cutting through the tension like a finely sharpened blade. "I am not sending him to prison over a wedding. I am sending him to prison for federal wire fraud, identity theft, and grand larceny." The finality of my statement struck Warren like a physical blow. He stumbled backward, clutching his chest. "You are a monster!" Yvonne shrieked, scrambling to her feet. She pointed a trembling, manicured finger directly at my face. "You are a cold, heartless monster. We raised you. We put a roof over your head. And you wait until the most important night of your brother's life to ruin him. You planned this. You wanted to humiliate us in front of Arthur and his wife." "I did not plan for Darius to steal from me, Mom," I replied smoothly. "I simply provided the rope and you all happily tied the noose. You wanted to play high society games. You wanted to pretend you belonged in this echelon of wealth. You enabled a fraud, and now you get to pay the ultimate price." Judge Harrison stepped forward, completely ignoring Yvonne's hysterical crying. He turned his attention back to Warren, his expression radiating absolute contempt. You are stripped of every ounce of dignity you thought you possessed. Warren, the judge, declared, his deep voice leaving no room for negotiation. You came to my country club. You sat in my box at the charity gala. You presented yourselves as pillars of the community. You are nothing but common thieves dressed in rented tuxedos. You actively conspired to defraud my family, and you sacrificed your own daughter to do it. Warren shook his head frantically, tears streaming down his gray-aged face. Arthur, please, we can fix this. Darius is a good man. He just made a mistake. We will pay back the money. I will sell the cars. I will empty my retirement accounts. You have no retirement accounts, I reminded him ruthlessly. Darius drained them 18 months ago. You have no cars. They are leased under my company's name, and Elijah is having them repossessed tomorrow morning. You have absolutely nothing left, Dad. The absolute truth of his financial ruin finally sank in. Warren looked down at his own hands as if he did not recognize them. The social standing he had sacrificed everything to achieve was completely obliterated. He was standing in a dark ballroom surrounded by flashing emergency lights, exposed as a co-conspirator in a massive federal crime. His elite friends had fled. His powerful new in-laws were looking at him with pure disgust. The carefully constructed facade of black excellence he had so desperately tried to project had crumbled into dust. Yvonne let out a loud, pathetic wail and buried her face in her hands. She finally understood the magnitude of their downfall. There would be no more country club dinners. There would be no more bragging to her friends about her wealthy tech CEO's son. There would be no fancy holidays funded by stolen corporate cards. They were going to face foreclosure, bankruptcy, and federal indictments. Judge Harrison turned away from my parents, treating them as if they were already ghosts. He looked at his daughter, who was trembling violently in her ruined designer gown. The stage was set for the ultimate rejection. The judge had seen enough evidence, and it was time for the final verdict to be delivered by the bride herself. Vanessa stood shivering under the harsh glare of the emergency strobe lights. The custom Vera Wang gown, which just an hour ago had been the ultimate symbol of her triumphant entry into high society matrimony, now looked like a heavy, suffocating cage. She stared at the man pinned against the table by the financial fraud detectives. The charming, sophisticated billionaire she had fallen in love with had completely vanished. In his place was a sweating, desperate criminal who had used her family to escape his own pathetic reality. Judge Harrison placed a firm, protective hand on his daughter's shoulder. He did not need to raise his voice to command the attention of everyone still lingering in the grand ballroom and the foyer beyond. The remaining elite guests, those VIPs, state senators, and hospital board members who had lingered near the open brass doors, hoping for an explanation, were watching the spectacle with morbid fascination. Vanessa, the judge, said, his voice ringing with absolute, unshakable authority, "Take your things, we are leaving." Darius strained against the grip of the detectives, lifting his head from the ruined tablecloth. "No," he screamed, his voice cracking into a pathetic, desperate whine. "Nessa, please, you cannot just leave me here. We are supposed to be getting married. We are supposed to be partners. I did all of this for us. I wanted to give you the life you deserve." "Do not you dare speak to my daughter," the judge roared, stepping forward to completely block Darius's view of Vanessa. "You have no right to even look at her. You orchestrated a massive financial fraud, you dragged our reputation into the mud, and you expected us to simply smile and foot the bill when your lies caught up to you. Our family does not associate with felons." The words struck Darius like a physical blow. "Our family does not associate with felons." That single sentence officially severed the connection Darius had sacrificed his own sister to forge. The Alpha Kappa Alpha sorority sisters, standing in a protective cluster behind Vanessa, began whispering furiously among themselves, their eyes darting between Darius and my parents with pure, unadulterated contempt. The social execution was happening in real time. Vanessa slowly stepped out from behind her father. Her tear-stained face had hardened into a mask of pure, freezing fury. The shock and the humiliation had finally burned away, leaving behind a profound, righteous anger. She walked deliberately toward the table where Darius was being held. Her designer heels clicked sharply against the hardwood, echoing the exact same rhythm mine had when I first walked into the room. Nessa, Darius pleaded, his eyes wide with a desperate, manipulative hope. He thought his charm could save him one last time. Just give me a chance to explain. I can fix this. I love you. Vanessa stopped just inches away from his face. You love me, she repeated, her voice dripping with absolute disgust. You do not even know what love is. You looked me in the eyes every single day for the past year and lied to my face. You sat in my parents' living room and drank their wine while bragging about a tech company that did not even exist. You let me plan a honeymoon to Bora Bora knowing you could not even afford the taxi ride to the airport. Darius swallowed hard sweat dripping from his chin onto the crushed white orchids on the table. I was going to pay it back. I just needed one big contract. I was doing it to build our legacy. You have no legacy, Vanessa spat. You are a parasite. You stole from your own sister. You let your parents mortgage their home to pay for these flowers. You used my family's name to validate your pathetic empty life. I am a partner at a corporate law firm, Darius. I have spent my entire life building my own career, and you tried to turn me into an unwitting accomplice in a federal wire fraud case. You made me look like an absolute fool in front of my entire network. Vanessa raised her hand and delivered a vicious, echoing slap directly across Darius's face. The sound cracked through the ballroom like a gunshot. The slap was so forceful it snapped Darius's head to the side, leaving a bright red, stinging handprint across his cheek. A collective gasp rose from the guests lingering in the doorway. Even the detectives pinning Darius down seemed momentarily stunned by the sheer ferocity of the strike. Darius let out a pathetic whimper, the last remnants of his golden child arrogance completely shattered. It is over, Vanessa declared, her voice echoing with finality. Do not ever attempt to contact me again. Do not send your lawyers to my father. You are entirely dead to me. Vanessa turned on her heel, signaling to her bridesmaids that it was time to go. The salmon pink and apple green dresses moved in unison, forming a tight protective wall around the bride. Judge Harrison nodded approvingly at his daughter's strength, turning to follow her toward the exit. But my mother, Yvonne, could not let it go. She could not accept that the social standing she had sacrificed her own daughter to achieve was walking out the door. In a moment of sheer irrational desperation, Yvonne scrambled up from the floor. She lunged forward, her emerald silk gown tearing slightly as she practically threw herself at Vanessa. Yvonne reached out and grabbed Vanessa's bare arm, her manicured fingers digging into the bride's skin. Vanessa, wait. Please wait. Yvonne sobbed, her voice hysterical. You cannot cancel the wedding. The invitations were sent. The society pages have already drafted the announcement. People will talk. They will ruin us. You have to stay. You have to help him. You are supposed to be his wife. Vanessa stopped dead in her tracks. She looked down at Yvonne's hand gripping her arm, her expression twisting into a look of absolute revulsion. She ripped her arm out of my mother's grasp so violently that Yvonne stumbled forward, nearly falling back onto the hardwood floor. Do not ever touch me, Vanessa hissed, glaring at my mother with a level of disdain usually reserved for insects. You are just as sick and delusional as your son. You knew he was a broke fraud and you smiled in my face while you helped him plan this entire charade. You cared more about getting your picture in the society pages than you cared about basic human decency. You are a pathetic, greedy woman and your entire family is a complete disgrace. Yvonne let out a loud, wretched wail, clutching her chest as if she had been physically stabbed. The brutal rejection from the very woman she had viewed as her ultimate social trophy was too much to bear. She looked around, desperately hoping anyone would come to her defense. But the room offered absolutely no sympathy. The remaining guests looked at her with nothing but sheer, undisguised disgust. Vanessa looked down at her own left hand. The massive, flawless diamond engagement ring glittered mockingly under the flashing emergency strobe lights. It was the ring Darius had purchased using my stolen corporate funds. It was the symbol of their fake hollow union. Vanessa grabbed the diamond ring, yanking it off her finger with a swift, aggressive motion. She did not hand it back to Darius. She did not place it on the table. She looked directly into my mother's terrified, tear-streaked eyes. Take your stolen property back, Vanessa commanded. She hurled the heavy diamond ring directly into Yvonne's chest. The metal struck my mother's collarbone before dropping to the floor, bouncing across the polished hardwood with a series of sharp metallic clicks until it rolled under a broken chair. Yvonne stared at the spot where the ring had landed, completely paralyzed by the absolute, undeniable humiliation of the moment. She fell to her knees again, sobbing uncontrollably, her hands covering her face as the last shred of her dignity evaporated into the cold air of the ruined ballroom. "Let us go," Judge Harrison ordered, stepping past my weeping mother without offering her a single glance. The judge placed a hand on Vanessa's back, guiding her out of the ballroom. The Alpha Kappa. Alpha bridesmaids followed closely behind, their heads held high, refusing to look at Darius or my parents ever again. As they marched through the grand foyer, the remaining elite guests, who had lingered to watch the spectacle, finally understood that the show was over. The verdict had been delivered. The exodus was immediate and absolute. The state senators, the hospital executives, the wealthy investors, and the high society socialites turned their backs on my family in perfect unison. They poured out of the venue in droves, shaking their heads and whispering furiously about the spectacular downfall of the groom. The sound of their footsteps echoed heavily through the hallways, a marching beat that signaled the total and complete annihilation of Darius's carefully constructed world. They left behind their half-full champagne flutes, their discarded silk napkins, and their completely shattered respect for my family. The heavy oak doors of the grand entrance swung shut as the last guest exited, leaving a hollow, echoing silence in their wake. My father, Warren, was still kneeling on the floor near the dance floor. He watched the massive, heavy doors close, taking his entire reputation with them. He did not move. He did not speak. He just stared at the empty foyer, his eyes blank and defeated. He had gambled his home, his morals, and his relationship with his only daughter for a seat at a table that had just explicitly rejected him forever. Darius stopped struggling against the detectives. He lay completely motionless against the caviar-stained tablecloth. The reality of his situation had finally crushed the last remaining ounce of fight out of him. He was not marrying into a powerful family. He was not a tech billionaire. He was a broke, exposed fraud who was about to be walked out of his own wedding reception in handcuffs. I stood in the center of the room, flanked by Elijah and the thick financial dossier that had served as the ultimate weapon of truth. I watched the elite guests walk out. I watched Vanessa throw the ring. I watched my mother weep on the floor and my father stare into the void. The social ruin was absolute. The loss of the marriage, the status, and the powerful network Darius had sacrificed me to get was completely permanent. There was no coming back from this. They had been cast out of the very echelon of society they had lied and stolen to enter. The isolation they had tried to force on me at the front door had now become their eternal reality. The stage was now perfectly clear. The audience had departed, leaving only the perpetrators and the consequences. It was time for the final act to begin, and I was going to ensure that every single one of them paid the absolute highest price for their betrayal. The grand ballroom of the Obsidian Estate, once a masterpiece of high society celebration, now resembled the aftermath of a localized hurricane. The emergency strobe lights continued their relentless, blinding rhythm, casting sharp, disjointed shadows across the wreckage. Crushed white orchids, spilled champagne, and shattered crystal littered the polished hardwood floor. The sheer silence left behind by the fleeing elite guests was deafening, broken only by the heavy, ragged breathing of my parents and the soft, professional murmurs of the two financial fraud detectives. I stood at the center of this devastation, my midnight blue Tom Ford suit completely untouched by the surrounding chaos. Elijah remained a steadfast presence at my side, his hand resting lightly on the leather dossier that had just dismantled my family's entire fraudulent existence. The stage was completely bare. There were no more state senators to impress. There were no more federal judges to deceive. The audience had vanished, leaving only the architects of this colossal failure. The detective on the right gave a sharp, authoritative nod to his partner. Together they hoisted Darius off the caviar-stained tablecloth. They did not handle him with the gentle deference he was accustomed to. They hauled him up roughly, forcing him to stand on his own 2 feet. Darius swayed unsteadily. The custom ivory tuxedo jacket, the one he had bragged about importing from Italy, was entirely ruined, smeared with expensive food and sweat. He looked around the vast, empty ballroom. His eyes darted to the grand entrance, then to the head table where Vanessa had stood just minutes before, and finally back to me. The absolute reality of his isolation finally breached the thick walls of his narcissism. He was no longer the golden child protected by a fortress of parental lies. I was a broke, exposed criminal facing two federal detectives. The fight completely drained out of him. Darius's legs buckled. He collapsed, falling heavily to his knees right in the middle of the dance floor, landing squarely amidst the scattered, crushed flower arrangements. The sharp snap of breaking stems echoed in the quiet room. Tears began to stream down his face, cutting through the sweat and grime. "Naomi, please," he choked out, his voice cracking into a pathetic, high-pitched sob. "Please do not do this to me. I am begging you. Look at me, Naomi. It is me. It is your brother. We grew up together. We share the same blood." I stared down at him, my expression completely impassive. I watched the man who had mocked me at the front doors just 2 hours ago, now groveling in the wreckage of his own making. "Naomi, I will pay you back!" Darius cried, bringing his hands together in a desperate pleading motion. "I swear to God I will pay back every single cent. I will get a job. I will work day and night. I will sign whatever contracts Elijah wants me to sign. Just call off the detectives. Tell them it was a misunderstanding. Tell them it was an authorized loan. You have the power to stop this. Do not send me to federal prison. I will not survive in there. You know I will not survive. I only did this because the pressure was too much. Mom and Dad expected so much from me. Vanessa's family expected so much. I was just trying to make everyone proud. I was just trying to build a legacy." His words were a masterclass in classic manipulation. Even now, kneeling in the ruins of his own massive fraud, he was actively trying to shift the blame. He blamed the pressure. He blamed our parents' expectations. He blamed his desperate need to build a legacy. He took absolutely zero accountability for forging signatures, stealing corporate funds, and completely mortgaging our parents' future. I wanted me to play the role of the silent, reliable safety net one last time. Before I could even formulate a response, my mother, Yvonne, scrambled across the hardwood floor on her hands and knees. She crawled through the spilled champagne and the broken glass, completely abandoning whatever shreds of dignity she had left. She reached my feet and threw herself forward, her arms wrapping tightly around my ankles. She buried her tear-streaked face against the polished leather of my shoes, letting out a series of wretched, hysterical sobs. "Naomi, my beautiful, brilliant daughter," Yvonne wailed, her voice muffled against my legs. "Please have mercy. I am begging you on my hands and knees. Have mercy on your brother. Have mercy on your family. We were wrong. We were so incredibly wrong. I was wrong to say those terrible things to you at the door. You are not an embarrassment. You are our pride and joy. You are the strongest person I know. Please use that strength to save us. If you let them take Darius away, it will kill your father. It will literally kill him. We will lose the house. We will lose everything. We will do whatever you want. We will publicly apologize. We will attend counseling. We will make Darius work for your company for free until the debt is paid. Just do not let them put him in handcuffs. Do not let them take my baby boy away." The sheer hypocrisy of her pleas made my stomach turn. Just hours ago, she had looked me dead in the eyes and told me my masculine energy ruined the elegant aesthetic of her high society fantasy. Now stripped of her wealthy in-laws and her country club status, she was suddenly weaponizing the title of family to demand my salvation. She did not love me. She only respected the immense power I currently held over her golden child's fate. She was weeping for her own loss of status. I looked down at my mother, clutching my ankles like a desperate prisoner. I looked over at my father, Warren, who was still slumped in the shadows, too paralyzed by his own financial ruin to even speak. And then I looked at Darius, still weeping amidst the crushed white orchids on the dance floor. I felt a profound, liberating emptiness. The emotional hold they had maintained over my life for 32 years was officially severed. I calmly shifted my weight and took a deliberate, forceful step back, breaking my mother's grip on my ankles. Yvonne let out a sharp gasp, her hands falling empty against the wet floor. I smoothed the front of my jacket, maintaining absolute, unwavering eye contact with Darius. "When Dad kicked me out, you told me not to embarrass the family. I am just taking out the trash that actually embarrasses us." The words hung in the air, sharp, final, and completely devoid of mercy. Darius let out a loud, agonizing wail, burying his face in his hands. He finally understood that the manipulation tactics he had relied on his entire life had completely lost their power. I was immune to his tears. I was immune to my mother's begging. The boundary was set in solid steel, and there was absolutely nothing they could do to cross it. I turned my head and gave a sharp, definitive nod to the two financial fraud detectives standing by. The detectives did not waste another second. They hauled Darius up by his arms, ignoring his frantic protests and his pathetic crying. The detective on the right pulled a pair of heavy steel handcuffs from his belt. He grabbed Darius's wrists, forcing them behind his back with practiced professional force. The sharp, metallic click of the handcuffs locking into place echoed loudly through the cavernous ballroom. It was the unmistakable sound of absolute consequence. Darius Warren Adams, the detective, announced, his voice ringing with unyielding legal authority over the hum of the emergency sirens. You are under arrest for federal wire fraud, identity theft, and grand larceny. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be provided for you. Do you understand these rights as I have read them to you? Darius did not answer. He just hung his head, his shoulders shaking, as the reality of his future solidified around his wrists. Yvonne screamed again, desperately reaching out toward the detectives, but Elijah smoothly stepped in her path, blocking her from interfering with the arrest. Warren remained on the floor, staring blankly at the cold steel handcuffs reflecting the harsh, unrelenting strobe lights. I stood tall in the empty ballroom, breathing in the sweet air of vindication. The golden child was officially dethroned. The charade was permanently dismantled. And as the detectives marched my brother toward the exit, his head bowed in ultimate defeat, I knew with absolute certainty that my family would never ever underestimate me again. The reverberations of that night did not quietly fade away. They echoed through the federal court system for the next 6 months with ruthless, absolute precision. There were no secret bailouts. There were no backroom deals to protect the family reputation. I made sure of that. Elijah and my legal team handed over every single piece of evidence to the federal prosecutors. The forged mortgage documents, the unauthorized wire transfers, the IP logs showing Darius accessing my corporate accounts from his leased luxury apartment. The prosecution built a case so incredibly watertight that Darius's public defender advised him to take a plea deal immediately to avoid a 20-year sentence. Even in the courtroom, he tried to manipulate the narrative. He cried in front of the judge, blaming the immense pressure of living up to the black excellence standard, claiming his entire fraud was just a desperate attempt to make his family proud. The judge was completely unmoved by his theatrical tears. The golden child, the man who had spent his entire life failing upward on the backs of others, finally hit a wall he could not charm his way over. I did not attend his sentencing hearing. I had no desire to sit in a sterile courtroom and watch him cry for leniency. Elijah attended in my place, providing me with a detailed summary the moment the gavel came down. The judge showed zero mercy. Darius was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison for wire fraud, identity theft, and grand larceny with no possibility of early parole. I was ordered to pay full restitution, a completely laughable concept, considering he had absolutely no assets to his name. The tech CEO facade was permanently replaced by an inmate number and a standard issue uniform. There would be no catering, no champagne, and no curated aesthetic where he was going. He was finally forced to exist in a reality he could not fake. While Darius was adapting to federal lockup, my parents were experiencing a complete and utter financial annihilation. Warren and Yvonne had spent their treating my wealth as their personal safety net, blindly trusting that their favorite son would somehow magically generate a fortune to cover his tracks. When Darius went to prison, he left them holding the bag for every single catastrophic financial decision he had made. The second mortgage he had fraudulently taken out on their suburban home was an ironclad high-interest loan. Because Warren had actively participated in helping Darius bypass security protocols at the bank, he could not claim total ignorance without facing his own conspiracy charges. Warren had to absorb the debt. The financial burden was immediate and crushing. They owed $200,000 to a predatory private equity lender, plus the compounding interest, plus the exorbitant legal fees they incurred trying to keep Darius out of a maximum security facility. The collectors did not care about Warren's previous status or his perfectly tailored suits. They only cared about the bottom line, and the bottom line was that my parents were fundamentally insolvent. The daily harassing phone calls from debt collectors replaced the polite invitations to high society galas. They were drowning in a sea of red ink, suffocating under the weight of the very lies they had helped construct. They had completely drained their meager savings within the first 2 months. Their credit scores plummeted into the low hundreds. The warning letters from the bank piled up on their kitchen counter, completely ignored until the bright yellow foreclosure notice was physically taped to their front door. The house they had lived in for 30 years, the house they had used as their ultimate symbol of upper-middle-class stability, was officially seized by the bank. The eviction process was swift and entirely devoid of dignity. They had exactly 30 days to vacate the premises. They were forced to hold a humiliating estate sale right on their front lawn, just to scrape together enough cash for a security deposit on a new place. I drove past their street once during that month, parked a block away in my Maybach, just observing. I watched strangers picking through their expensive furniture, haggling over Yvonne's custom dining chairs and Warren's imported golf clubs. They sold everything that had once made them feel superior. They had to leave behind their expensive art, their curated wine collection, and their sprawling backyard. Their new reality consisted of shared laundry facilities and thin walls that let in the sound of street traffic all night long. The sheer humiliation of carrying their few remaining belongings in cheap cardboard boxes up 3 flights of stairs broke whatever remained of their pride. With no credit and absolutely no references, my parents were forced to move into a rundown, cramped 2-bedroom apartment complex on the far edge of the city. It was a poorly maintained building with peeling paint, noisy neighbors, and a parking lot filled with broken-down cars. There were no sweeping limestone steps. There were no manicured rose gardens. The stark contrast between the luxury they had tried to steal and the poverty they had actually earned was absolute. They were living paycheck to paycheck on Warren's minimal Social Security benefits, clipping coupons, and struggling to keep the heat on during the winter. They were finally experiencing the exact financial desperation they had callously assumed I would tolerate when they kicked me out of the estate. The loss of their physical wealth was devastating, but the loss of their social standing was what truly broke them. In their elite circles, image was the only currency that mattered. When the news of Darius's arrest and the canceled wedding hit the local society pages, the fallout was instantaneous and utterly brutal. The prominent federal judge, Vanessa's father, made sure that everyone in his extensive network knew exactly what kind of people Warren and Yvonne were. He systematically blacklisted them from every single significant social event in the city. The church they had attended for 2 decades, a congregation filled with wealthy professionals and local politicians, completely turned its back on them. The Sunday after the wedding disaster, the pastor politely but firmly asked Warren to step down from the finance committee. By the following month, the congregation members were actively crossing the street to avoid speaking to Yvonne. Their country club membership was quietly revoked due to unpaid dues. The Jack and Jill alumni stopped returning their phone calls. The friends they had bragged to about their billionaire daughter and their tech genius son blocked their numbers. They became social pariahs, completely isolated and utterly disgraced. The community they had sacrificed me to impress had chewed them up and spit them out the moment their fraudulent facade collapsed. 6 months to the day after the wedding. That never happened. I was sitting in my corner office reviewing a highly profitable acquisition portfolio. My assistant walked in and placed the morning mail on my pristine glass desk. Right at the top of the stack was a standard white envelope. The return address was a cheap apartment complex on the outskirts of the city. The handwriting was unmistakably my mother's, frantic, shaky, and desperate. I stared at the envelope for a long time. I knew exactly what was inside. It was a plea for salvation. It was a long, tear-stained narrative begging for forgiveness, begging for a second chance, begging for a small financial loan just to help them pay their utility bills. It was the pathetic, inevitable conclusion to their toxic entitlement. They genuinely believed that after all the abuse, all the lies, and all the betrayal, they could just reach out and tap into my resources one more time because we shared the same blood. They thought a handwritten note filled with emotional manipulation could erase decades of cruelty and the absolute destruction they attempted to bring upon my life. I did not open the envelope. I did not read the desperate apologies or the pathetic excuses. I simply reached into my desk drawer, pulled out a thick black marker, and wrote 3 words across the envelope in bold, undeniable capital letters: Return to sender. I handed the envelope back to my assistant and instructed her to drop it in the outgoing mail bin immediately. As she walked out of the office, I turned my chair to look out the floor-to-ceiling windows at the sprawling city skyline. I felt a profound, untouchable sense of peace. The consequences of their toxic behavior were entirely permanent. Karma had been delivered through the cold, unyielding mechanisms of the legal and financial systems, and I had absolutely zero intention of ever disrupting that perfect justice. They had made their own bed built on a foundation of lies, greed, and superficial status. Now they were forced to sleep in it every single night, stripped of their power, isolated from their community, and entirely forgotten by the daughter they threw away. 1 year after that catastrophic night, I stood on the limestone balcony of the Obsidian estate. The crisp evening air carried the scent of pine and progress. The property no longer served as a sterile, pretentious rental hall for the city's superficial elite. I had transformed the 40-acre estate into a premier business incubator and networking hub. It was now a sanctuary and launchpad designed for self-made Black female entrepreneurs. Looking down through the glass doors into the grand ballroom, I witnessed a contrast to the disaster that had unfolded 12 months prior. The room was not filled with fake executives or status-obsessed socialites drinking stolen champagne. Instead, the ballroom was alive with genuine brilliance and ambition. Over 300 women filled the space. They were founders, engineers, venture capitalists, and innovators. They were pitching startups, securing funding rounds, and building authentic networks based on mutual respect and hard work. This was what true Black excellence looked like. It was not a performance put on to impress a federal judge. It was a tangible, powerful economic force. I watched a young software developer present her pitch deck on the main stage in the exact spot where my father had once lied about my brother's phantom tech empire. The audience was captivated by her presentation. There were no flashing emergency strobe lights today. The crystal chandeliers burned with a steady warmth, illuminating a room filled with women who had been told they were too aggressive, too masculine, or too ambitious. I had created a space where their ambition was not just welcomed, but enthusiastically funded. I rested my hands on the cool marble railing, feeling a profound sense of accomplishment. I had taken the site of family betrayal and repurposed it into a fortress of empowerment. I took the capital. My family tried to steal and multiplied it, pouring it directly into the hands of women who knew how to build a legacy. I did not just survive the toxic environment I was raised in. I dismantled it and used the bricks to construct an empire where people like me could thrive. The glass door behind me opened with a soft click. Elijah stepped out onto the balcony, moving with his usual professional elegance. He walked up beside me, leaning against the marble railing. In his hands, he held 2 crystal flutes filled with vintage champagne. He handed one to me, the golden liquid bubbling perfectly in the crisp night air. "We did it, Naomi," Elijah said, his deep voice carrying a rare note of genuine warmth. The initial funding rounds for the first incubator cohort successfully closed just 10 minutes ago. We just secured over $15 million in seed capital for 7 different female-led startups. The launch tonight is a massive, undeniable, and record-breaking success. I took the champagne flute, the cool crystal, grounding me completely in the beautiful present moment. I looked at Elijah, my brilliant, razor-sharp attorney, and the most fiercely loyal ally I had ever known. He had stood faithfully by me when my own blood turned against me in the worst possible way. He had helped me lock the doors on my brother's fraud, and he had worked tirelessly by my side to build this new venture from the ground up. He was not just my legal counsel anymore. He was my trusted partner in every single sense of the word. "Thank you, Elijah," I said, raising my glass slightly toward him in a silent salute. I could not have built this entire enterprise without you standing firmly in my corner. You built this, Naomi Elijah, corrected gently, tapping his glass against mine with a soft, resonant clink. I just handled the complicated legal paperwork. You are the one who had the vision to turn a horrific battlefield into a beautiful sanctuary. You took back your power and now you are sharing it with hundreds of talented women who desperately need it. That is the real enduring legacy you are leaving behind. I turned my gaze back to the crowded ballroom down below. I saw Clara, the venue manager who had flawlessly executed the shutdown of my brother's wedding, now coordinating the catering staff with a bright, genuine smile. I saw the two financial fraud detectives who had arrested Darius now happily working as private security consultants for the estate. I saw a room full of brilliant people who respected me for my mind, my relentless work ethic, and my character, not for what they could selfishly extract from my bank accounts. This was my new, fiercely protective, chosen family. They did not demand my money under the false, manipulative guise of familial obligation. They did not gaslight me, emotionally manipulate me, or demand that I shrink myself to make someone else feel bigger and more important. They stood with me in the dark trenches, and now we gladly celebrated our massive victories together. The crushing, heavy isolation I had felt for 32 long years was completely gone, permanently replaced by a deep, unshakable foundation of trust and mutual respect. I took a slow, highly satisfying sip of the vintage champagne. The taste was sharp, crisp, and wonderfully victorious on my tongue. I looked out over the sprawling, brightly illuminated grounds of the Obsidian estate, remembering the frantic, desperate flight of the elite guests, the pathetic groveling of my parents, and the sheer terror in my brother's eyes when the handcuffs clicked shut. I thought about the handwritten letter I had just confidently returned to sender, permanently sealing the heavy tomb on my toxic past forever. They say blood is thicker than water. I said, my voice carrying a quiet, absolute certainty into the cool night air. I looked at Elijah, offering him a calm, resolute smile. But they forget that water keeps you alive, while toxic blood will cause an infection that kills you. That wedding never happened, but it was the greatest celebration of my freedom.